Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in her small Texas town. While they spent their afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she found herself drawn to military documentaries and books about famous battles throughout history. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps of historical campaigns rather than posters of pop stars, and she could recite the strategies of Sun Tzu as easily as most teenagers could quote their favorite songs. Growing up in Millbrook, a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Sarah's interests made her stand out in ways that weren't always comfortable. Her father, Miguel Martinez, worked at the local automotive plant, putting in long hours to support his family. Her mother, Linda, managed the household and worked part-time at the town's only grocery store. They were hard-working people who valued education and discipline, but they often wondered where their daughter's fascination with military strategy and leadership came from. Sarah's younger brother, David, was more typical of the Martinez family, easygoing, popular at school, and content to follow the well-worn paths that most young people in Millbrook traveled. He played football, dated the head cheerleader, and planned to take over their uncle's construction business after high school. The contrast between the siblings couldn't have been more stark, and it often left Sarah feeling like an outsider in her own family. At Millbrook High School, Sarah's reputation preceded her. She was known as the girl who corrected their history teacher when he got facts wrong about World War II battles, the one who could solve complex strategic problems that stumped even the brightest students, and the teenager who spent her lunch breaks reading military biographies instead of socializing with her classmates. Her teachers recognized her exceptional intelligence, particularly in subjects related to history, geography, and strategic thinking, but her social life suffered as a result of her unique interests. The divide between Sarah and her peers became even more pronounced during her senior year. While other students focused on prom preparations, college applications for traditional degrees, and weekend parties, Sarah spent her time researching military academies and considering a career path that seemed impossible for someone from her background. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, tried to steer her toward more practical options like teaching or business administration, but Sarah's heart was set on something bigger. The transformation of Sarah's life began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in late spring. She had just finished presenting a detailed analysis of the Battle of Gettysburg to her American history class, complete with hand-drawn maps and tactical explanations that impressed even her teacher, Mr. Roberts. As she gathered her materials and prepared to head to her next class, she noticed a small group of her classmates whispering and pointing in her direction. The group was led by Jessica Crawford, the most popular girl in school and someone who had made it clear from the beginning that she found Sarah's interests strange and off-putting. Jessica came from one of the wealthier families in town. Her father owned the largest real estate agency in the county, and her mother was active in all the social clubs that mattered in Millbrook's small-town hierarchy. Jessica had always viewed Sarah as competition, even though they moved in completely different circles, and she seemed to take pleasure in finding ways to diminish Sarah's achievements. "Did you see her up there, acting like she's some kind of general?" Jessica whispered loudly enough for Sarah to hear. "It's so weird how she's obsessed with all that military stuff. Like, what's she trying to prove?" Sarah tried to ignore the comments, as she had learned to do over the years, but Jessica wasn't finished. She had been planning something for weeks, waiting for the right moment to execute what she considered a harmless prank that would finally put Sarah in her place. Jessica had grown tired of watching Sarah receive praise from teachers and seeing her confidence grow with each successful presentation or academic achievement. The plan Jessica had devised was simple but cruel. She had noticed that Sarah always stayed after school on Tuesdays to work on extra credit projects in the library, usually staying until the custodial staff began cleaning the building. This routine gave Jessica and her friends the perfect opportunity to execute their scheme without too many witnesses around to complicate things later. As the final bell rang and students began filing out of the building, Jessica gathered her core group of followers: Madison Turner, Ashley Roberts, and Brittany Cole. These girls had been her loyal supporters since middle school, always ready to participate in whatever Jessica planned, whether it was spreading gossip, excluding certain classmates from social events, or engaging in more direct forms of harassment. They shared Jessica's view that Sarah needed to be brought down a few notches, and they were excited to be part of what Jessica promised would be an unforgettable prank. Sarah, unaware of the plotting happening around her, made her way to the library as usual. She had been working on an independent study project about military leadership throughout history, focusing particularly on how effective leaders adapted their strategies to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The project wasn't required for graduation, but Sarah found the research fascinating and hoped it might strengthen her applications to military academies. The school library in the late afternoon was peaceful and quiet, with only a few other students scattered among the tables working on their own projects. Sarah settled into her usual spot near the back corner, surrounded by stacks of books she had checked out over the past several weeks. She lost herself in reading about historical figures who had overcome adversity and achieved greatness despite facing overwhelming challenges and skepticism from others. As the hour grew later and the library began to empty out, Sarah remained focused on her work. She was particularly engrossed in reading about a female military strategist who had disguised herself as a man to serve in combat during the Revolutionary War. The story resonated with Sarah, who often felt like she had to prove herself in ways that her male classmates didn't, and she took careful notes about the woman's tactics and leadership style. It was during this moment of deep concentration that Jessica and her friends made their move. They had been waiting in the hallway, watching through the library windows until they were certain that Sarah was alone except for the librarian, who had stepped away from her desk to reorganize books in another section. The custodial staff was working in a different part of the building, and the few remaining students had already left. Jessica pushed open the library door slowly, signaling for her friends to follow her inside. They moved quietly across the carpeted floor, their footsteps muffled as they approached Sarah's table from behind. Sarah was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice their approach until it was too late to react or call for help. "Hey there, General Martinez," Jessica said in a mock-sweet voice that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Working on more of your war games?" Sarah looked up from her book, instantly recognizing the tone and the potential for trouble. She had learned over the years to be cautious when Jessica approached her, especially when she was surrounded by her friends and they were alone without teacher supervision. "Just studying," Sarah replied carefully, beginning to gather her materials in case she needed to leave quickly. "You know what I think?" Jessica continued, moving closer to Sarah's chair. "I think you spend so much time pretending to be a soldier that you've forgotten you're actually just a regular girl. Maybe it's time someone reminded you of that fact." Before Sarah could respond or move away, Jessica's friends moved to surround her chair, blocking her escape routes and making it clear that this wasn't going to be a simple verbal confrontation. Madison grabbed Sarah's backpack and tossed it aside, scattering her carefully organized notes across the floor. Ashley moved to block the view from the librarian's desk, while Brittany positioned herself near the library entrance to watch for any approaching adults. "What are you doing?" Sarah demanded, trying to stand up from her chair, but Jessica pushed her back down with surprising force. "Just giving you a little makeover," Jessica replied with a cruel smile. "Something that will help you fit in better with the rest of us normal girls." From her purse, Jessica produced a small electric hair clipper that she had borrowed from her boyfriend, who used it for touching up his haircut between barbershop visits. She had charged it fully the night before and tested it to make sure it would work properly when the moment came. The other girls gasped with excitement and nervousness as they realized what Jessica intended to do. Sarah's eyes widened with shock and fear as she saw the clippers and understood Jessica's plan. "You can't do this," she said, her voice becoming louder as panic set in. "This is assault. You'll get in serious trouble." "Who's going to report it?" Jessica laughed. "The librarian who never pays attention to what's happening back here? The teachers who have all gone home for the day? Besides, it's just hair. It'll grow back eventually." Jessica flicked on the clippers, and the buzzing sound filled the quiet library space. Sarah tried to stand again, but Madison and Ashley grabbed her arms and held her in place while Jessica approached with the electric razor. The three girls were stronger than Sarah had expected, and their determination to see the prank through to completion gave them additional strength. "Please don't do this," Sarah pleaded, genuine fear creeping into her voice. "I've never done anything to hurt any of you. Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you need to learn your place," Jessica replied coldly. "You walk around this school acting like you're better than everyone else, like you're some kind of military genius or something. Well, guess what? You're just another high school girl, and it's time you started looking like one." Before Sarah could make another attempt to escape or call for help, Jessica pressed the clippers against the side of Sarah's head and began to cut. Long sections of Sarah's dark brown hair fell to the floor as Jessica worked methodically, creating an uneven, patchy pattern that looked nothing like any legitimate haircut. The other girls held Sarah firmly in place, despite her struggles and increasingly desperate pleas for them to stop. The sound of the clippers masked Sarah's quiet sobs as she watched years of hair growth disappear in a matter of minutes. Jessica seemed to take particular pleasure in the process, making comments about how much better Sarah looked without her princess hair and how this new look was much more appropriate for someone with her interests. The other girls laughed nervously, caught up in the excitement of the moment but beginning to realize that they might have gone too far. When Jessica finally turned off the clippers and stepped back to admire her work, Sarah's head was a patchwork of uneven stubble and completely bald spots. The haircut was so poorly executed that it would be impossible to fix without shaving off all the remaining hair and starting completely over. Sarah's face was streaked with tears, and her whole body shook with a combination of anger, humiliation, and disbelief at what had just happened to her. "There," Jessica announced with satisfaction. "Now you look like the soldier you've always wanted to be. Maybe this will help you fit in better with all those military heroes you're always reading about." The girls released their hold on Sarah and stepped back, suddenly less confident about their actions as they saw the full extent of what they had done. The library floor was covered with Sarah's hair, and the sight of her sitting there with her ruined haircut made the prank seem much more serious and cruel than it had felt while they were planning it. Sarah slowly reached up to touch her head, feeling the uneven patches and bald spots that Jessica had created. The reality of what had happened began to sink in, and she realized that she would have to face not only the rest of the school year, but also her family and the entire town, looking like this. The humiliation was overwhelming, but underneath it, a spark of something else began to grow, a determination to prove that she was stronger than these girls could ever imagine. Sarah sat motionless in the library chair for several minutes after Jessica and her friends had left, listening to their laughter echoing down the hallway as they departed. The building had grown even quieter, with only the distant sound of the custodial staff working in another wing breaking the silence. She stared at the scattered piles of her hair on the floor, each strand a reminder of the violation she had just experienced. When the librarian, Mrs. Peterson, finally returned to her desk and noticed Sarah sitting in the back corner, she initially didn't register what had happened. It wasn't until she walked closer to check on why a student was still in the library so late that she saw the aftermath of Jessica's cruel prank. Mrs. Peterson gasped audibly and immediately moved to Sarah's side, kneeling down among the scattered hair and notebooks. "Oh my goodness, Sarah," Mrs. Peterson whispered, her voice filled with shock and concern. "What happened here? Who did this to you?" Sarah looked up at the older woman, tears still streaming down her face, but she found herself unable to speak. The trauma of what had just occurred seemed to have temporarily stolen her voice, and she could only gesture helplessly at the hair covering the floor around her chair. Mrs. Peterson had worked at the school for over 20 years and had seen many instances of bullying and teenage cruelty, but nothing quite as deliberate and humiliating as this. "We need to call your parents immediately," Mrs. Peterson said, reaching for her phone. "And the principal. This is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and whoever did this will face serious consequences." As Mrs. Peterson made the necessary phone calls, Sarah slowly began to gather her scattered materials from the floor. Her hands shook as she picked up her notebooks and books, many of which were now covered with her own hair. The research she had been doing on historical military leaders seemed almost mocking now, given her current state of helplessness and humiliation. Principal Williams arrived at the library within 15 minutes, followed shortly by Sarah's parents, who had rushed to the school as soon as they received Mrs. Peterson's call. Miguel Martinez's face turned red with anger when he saw his daughter's condition, while Linda Martinez immediately went to Sarah's side, wrapping her arms around her daughter and trying to comfort her. "Who did this?" Miguel demanded, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I want to know exactly who was responsible for this attack on my daughter." Sarah finally found her voice and quietly told them about Jessica and her friends, describing what had happened step by step. Principal Williams took detailed notes and assured the family that the students responsible would be suspended pending a full investigation. He also recommended that they file a police report, as what had occurred could potentially be classified as assault. The ride home was silent except for Linda's occasional words of comfort and Miguel's muttered expressions of anger. Sarah stared out the window at the familiar streets of Millbrook, wondering how she would face returning to school and dealing with the stares and whispers that would inevitably follow. She also worried about how this incident would affect her plans for the future, particularly her hopes of attending a military academy. When they arrived home, David was waiting in the living room, having heard about the incident through the school's gossip network. His usual easygoing demeanor had been replaced by genuine anger and protective concern for his sister. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said, moving to hug her. "Some of the guys on the team heard what happened, and we're all really angry about it. Nobody thinks what Jessica did was funny or acceptable." That evening, the Martinez family gathered around the kitchen table to discuss what had happened and what steps they should take next. Miguel was adamant about pressing charges and ensuring that Jessica and her friends faced the full consequences of their actions. Linda was more focused on helping Sarah recover from the emotional trauma and figuring out how to repair the damage to her appearance. "I think we should take you to see a professional hairstylist tomorrow," Linda suggested gently. "Maybe they can even out what's left and help you find a style that you feel comfortable with until your hair grows back." Sarah nodded quietly, but her mind was elsewhere. As her family discussed practical matters like legal action and hair repair, she found herself thinking about the military leaders she had been reading about earlier that day. Many of them had faced moments of crisis and humiliation that had ultimately become turning points in their lives and careers. She wondered if this terrible experience might somehow become her own turning point. The next morning, Sarah and her mother visited the town's best salon, where the stylist, Maria Santos, took one look at Sarah's head and shook her head in dismay. "I've never seen anything like this," Maria said, examining the uneven patches and bald spots. "The only way to fix this properly is to shave off what's left and let you start completely fresh." Sarah looked at herself in the salon mirror, seeing for the first time in full light just how damaged her hair really was. The patches Jessica had created made her look like she had suffered from some kind of medical condition or accident. "Do it," she told Maria with sudden resolve. "Shave it all off." Linda looked concerned. "Are you sure, honey? Maybe we could try to work with what's left somehow." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "I want it all gone. I want to start over completely." As Maria carefully shaved away the remaining patches of hair, Sarah watched her reflection transform. Instead of feeling more humiliated, she found herself feeling strangely liberated. The girl looking back at her from the mirror looked different, certainly, but she also looked stronger and more determined than ever before. When they returned home, Sarah went immediately to her bedroom and sat down at her computer. She had been researching military academies for months, but had always felt intimidated by the application processes and uncertain about whether someone from her background could really succeed in such an environment. Now, looking at her reflection in her computer screen, she felt a new sense of purpose and determination. She spent the next several hours researching not just military academies, but also early enlistment programs and opportunities for accelerated advancement within the armed forces. She had always been an exceptional student, particularly in subjects related to strategy, history, and leadership, but she had never seriously considered the possibility of pursuing a military career immediately after high school rather than waiting to attend an academy. Over the next few days, as news of the incident spread throughout Millbrook, Sarah was surprised by the reactions she received. While some students whispered and stared, many others approached her to express their support and outrage at what had happened. Teachers who had always recognized her academic abilities began to see her in a new light, and several suggested that she consider pursuing her military interests more seriously. Mr. Roberts, her history teacher, was particularly supportive. He had served in the Marine Corps before becoming an educator and recognized something special in Sarah's approach to military strategy and leadership. "You know, Sarah," he said after class one day, "I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've never had a student with your natural understanding of military tactics and strategy. Have you ever considered enlisting rather than waiting for academy acceptance? The suggestion intrigued Sarah, particularly as she learned more about the opportunities available to exceptional recruits who demonstrated leadership potential early in their careers. She discovered programs that would allow her to advance quickly through the ranks while also pursuing advanced education and specialized training in areas that matched her interests and abilities. Jessica and her friends had been suspended from school pending the outcome of the investigation, but their absence did little to diminish the impact of what they had done. Sarah found herself the center of attention in ways that were both uncomfortable and empowering. Some students treated her with newfound respect, impressed by her dignity and strength in handling such a difficult situation. Others seemed almost afraid of her, as if her shaved head and calm demeanor suggested hidden depths of toughness that they hadn't previously recognized. The legal proceedings moved forward slowly, with Jessica's family hiring an expensive attorney who attempted to characterize the incident as a harmless prank that had gone too far. Jessica herself showed little remorse, apparently believing that her family's social standing in the community would protect her from serious consequences. Her parents seemed more concerned about potential damage to their reputation than about the harm their daughter had caused. Sarah's resolve only strengthened as she watched Jessica's family attempt to minimize and dismiss what had happened. She realized that people like Jessica would never respect or understand her unless she proved her worth in ways that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. A traditional path through high school and college suddenly seemed less appealing than the possibility of proving herself in an environment where merit and performance mattered more than social status or family connections. 3 weeks after the incident, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She announced to her family that she intended to enlist in the Army immediately after graduation, rather than pursuing admission to a military academy. Her parents were initially concerned about this change in plans, particularly given the emotional trauma she had recently experienced. "Are you sure you're making this decision for the right reasons?" Linda asked during a family discussion. "I don't want you to choose a difficult path just to prove something to Jessica and her friends. This isn't about them," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. "This is about me finally, pursuing what I've always been interested in, without letting fear or other people's expectations hold me back. What happened in the library showed me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. If I can handle that kind of humiliation and come out more determined than ever, I think I can handle military training." Miguel, who had initially been the most angry about the incident, found himself impressed by his daughter's resilience and clarity of purpose. "If this is really what you want," he said, "then your mother and I will support you completely. But I want you to be sure that you're not rushing into something because you're trying to escape from what happened here." Sarah spent the next several weeks meeting with military recruiters and learning about the various opportunities available to her. Her academic record, combined with her obvious passion for military history and strategy, made her an attractive candidate for several specialized programs. She was particularly interested in opportunities that would allow her to combine her leadership abilities with her analytical skills. The recruiter who worked most closely with Sarah was Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, a career soldier who had risen through the ranks and specialized in identifying and developing exceptional new talent. Sergeant Rodriguez was impressed not only by Sarah's academic achievements and test scores, but also by her mature approach to the challenges and responsibilities of military service. "I've been doing this job for 8 years, Sergeant Rodriguez told Sarah during one of their meetings, "and I rarely meet someone your age who has such a clear understanding of what military leadership really involves. Most recruits your age are attracted to the uniforms and the excitement, but you seem to genuinely understand the strategic and tactical aspects of military service." As graduation approached, Sarah felt increasingly confident about her decision to enlist. Her hair had begun to grow back, but she found that she actually preferred keeping it very short. The practical, no-nonsense style suited her personality and made her feel more serious and professional. She had also discovered that her shaved head, rather than making her appear weak or vulnerable, actually gave her an air of strength and determination that commanded respect. The night before graduation, Sarah sat in her bedroom, looking at the acceptance letter she had received from the military. Her training would begin just 6 weeks after graduation, giving her time to complete the legal proceedings related to Jessica's assault and to spend time with her family before beginning her new life. She felt nervous about the challenges ahead, but also more excited and purposeful than she had ever felt before. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that afternoon in the library. What Jessica had intended as a humiliating prank had actually become the catalyst for Sarah to pursue her dreams more boldly and confidently than she might have otherwise. She realized that sometimes the worst things that happen to a person could become the foundation for the best things that followed. Basic training at Fort Mooring, Georgia was everything Sarah had expected and more challenging than she had imagined. The physical demands pushed her body to its limits, while the mental challenges tested her ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. Unlike many of her fellow recruits who struggled with the transition from civilian to military life, Sarah seemed to thrive in the structured, goal-oriented environment. Her drill sergeant, Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, noticed Sarah's exceptional performance almost immediately. While other recruits complained about the early morning wake-up calls and the demanding physical training regimen, Sarah approached each day with quiet determination and focus. She helped struggling recruits with their studies, demonstrated natural leadership abilities during group exercises, and consistently scored at the top of her class in both written examinations and practical applications. Martinez, Staff Sergeant Thompson, called her aside after a particularly challenging tactical exercise in her 6th week of training. "I've been watching your performance, and I want to talk to you about some opportunities that might be available when you complete basic training." Sarah stood at attention, curious about what the experienced sergeant might have in mind. She had been hoping to qualify for advanced training programs that would allow her to develop her strategic and analytical skills, but she hadn't dared to assume that such opportunities would be offered to her so early in her military career. "You have exceptional scores across all areas of evaluation," Staff Sergeant Thompson continued, "but what really sets you apart is your natural understanding of tactical situations and your ability to lead others under pressure. Have you given any thought to officer candidate school?" The suggestion took Sarah by surprise. She had always assumed that becoming an officer would require years of experience and additional education, not something that would be possible immediately after completing basic training. "I thought officer candidate school required a college degree," she replied carefully. "Normally it does," Staff Sergeant Thompson acknowledged, "but there are exceptional circumstances where outstanding recruits can be fast-tracked through alternative programs. Your test scores and performance evaluations suggest that you have the potential to contribute at a much higher level than typical entry-level positions." Over the following weeks, as Sarah completed her basic training requirements, she learned more about the accelerated leadership development programs available to exceptional recruits. The military had identified a need for young officers who combine traditional leadership abilities with modern strategic thinking, particularly in an era when technological advancement and global complexity required new approaches to military challenges. Sarah's commanding officers recommended her for a competitive program that would allow her to complete an intensive leadership development course while also pursuing advanced education in military strategy and international relations. The program was highly selective, accepting only a handful of candidates each year, but Sarah's combination of academic excellence and demonstrated leadership ability made her a strong candidate. The application process required extensive interviews, additional testing, and recommendations from multiple levels of command. Sarah approached each requirement with the same focused determination that had characterized her approach to basic training. She studied military history and strategic theory during her limited free time, preparing for interviews that would test not only her knowledge but also her ability to think critically about complex military and diplomatic challenges. Colonel Patricia Hayes, who directed the Accelerated Leadership Program, conducted Sarah's final interview personally. Colonel Hayes had risen through the ranks over a 25-year career and had a reputation for identifying and developing exceptional military talent. She was particularly interested in Sarah's background and the experiences that had led her to military service. "Tell me about the incident that occurred during your senior year of high school," Colonel Hayes said, reviewing Sarah's file. "I understand it was quite traumatic, but I'm interested in how it affected your decision to pursue military service." Sarah had anticipated this question and had thought carefully about how to respond. She knew that her reaction to Jessica's assault had been a defining moment in her development, but she wanted to emphasize the positive aspects of what she had learned about herself rather than dwelling on the victimization she had experienced. The incident taught me that I was stronger than I had realized, Sarah replied thoughtfully. But, more importantly, it showed me that I didn't want to live my life being defined by other people's limitations or expectations. I realized that if I wanted to be taken seriously as a leader, I needed to prove myself in an environment where performance and capability mattered more than social dynamics or personal relationships. Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. And, how do you think that experience will affect your ability to lead others who may face similar challenges or discrimination? I think it gives me perspective on what it means to overcome adversity and find strength in difficult situations, Sarah answered. I also learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become catalysts for achieving things we might not have attempted otherwise. 3 weeks later, Sarah received notification that she had been accepted into the Accelerated Leadership Development Program. She would spend the next 18 months in intensive training that combined practical military skills with advanced academic coursework. The program would prepare her for rapid advancement through the officer ranks, with the expectation that she would assume significant leadership responsibilities much earlier in her career than was typical. The transition from basic training to the leadership development program was dramatic. Instead of sharing barracks with large groups of recruits, Sarah was assigned to smaller, more private quarters with other program participants. The academic coursework was demanding, covering everything from military history and strategy to international law and diplomatic relations. The practical training focused on advanced tactical skills and leadership development in increasingly complex scenarios. Sarah's classmates in the program were an exceptional group of young people from diverse backgrounds, but all sharing similar combinations of intelligence, ambition, and leadership potential. She formed close friendships with several of her fellow candidates, including James Chen, a former computer programmer who had enlisted after developing innovative cybersecurity techniques, and Maria Santos, a former teacher who had demonstrated exceptional skills in logistics and organizational management. The friendships Sarah developed during this period were different from any relationships she had experienced during high school. Her classmates shared her serious approach to personal development and professional achievement, and there was none of the petty social competition that had characterized her earlier educational experiences. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was among people who truly understood and appreciated her interests and abilities. The academic portion of the program was taught by a combination of active duty officers and civilian professors who specialized in military strategy and international relations. Sarah excelled in courses that required analytical thinking and strategic planning, often developing innovative solutions to complex hypothetical scenarios that impressed her instructors and classmates alike. Captain Robert Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, taught the program's advanced tactical strategy course and quickly identified Sarah as one of his most promising students. Martinez has an intuitive understanding of how different strategic approaches can be combined and adapted to changing circumstances, he wrote in one of Sarah's evaluation reports. She demonstrates the kind of flexible, creative thinking that will be essential for military leadership in the 21st century. The practical training components of the program were equally challenging and rewarding. Sarah participated in increasingly complex simulation exercises that tested her ability to lead diverse teams under pressure while making critical decisions with limited information. She discovered that the analytical skills she had developed through years of studying historical military campaigns translated effectively to modern leadership challenges. One exercise in particular tested Sarah's ability to command a mixed unit of personnel with different specialties and experience levels during a simulated humanitarian crisis. The scenario required coordinating with civilian authorities, managing limited resources, and adapting to rapidly changing conditions while maintaining team morale and effectiveness. Sarah's performance during this exercise earned recognition from multiple evaluators and established her reputation as someone capable of handling complex leadership responsibilities. As Sarah progressed through the program, she maintained regular contact with her family back in Millbrook. Her parents were amazed by the confidence and maturity she had developed during her military training, and they began to understand that her decision to enlist had been exactly the right choice for her personality and abilities. David had started college and often told his friends about his sister's achievements, taking pride in her success and the recognition she was receiving from her superiors. The legal proceedings related to Jessica's assault had concluded during Sarah's first few months of military service. Jessica and her friends had ultimately been charged with assault and sentenced to community service and probation. Jessica's family had attempted to negotiate a settlement that would avoid any criminal charges, but Sarah's parents had insisted on pursuing the matter through the courts to establish that such behavior carried serious consequences. When Sarah received updates about the legal resolution, she felt a sense of closure about the incident that had initially seemed so devastating. She realized that while Jessica's actions had been cruel and humiliating at the time, they had ultimately led Sarah to pursue opportunities and achievements that she might never have attempted otherwise. The contrast between her current life and what it would have been if she had followed a more traditional path after high school was striking. During her final months in the leadership development program, Sarah began to receive offers for various specialized assignments that would begin after her graduation. The military had identified her as having exceptional potential for rapid advancement, and several different commands were interested in utilizing her skills and abilities. She was particularly intrigued by opportunities that would allow her to combine her strategic thinking abilities with practical leadership responsibilities. Colonel Hayes called Sarah to her office during the final week of the program to discuss her future assignments. "You've exceeded expectations in every area of evaluation," the colonel told her. "Your instructors and supervisors are unanimous in their assessment that you're ready for significant leadership responsibilities much earlier than we typically expect. What kind of assignments are you considering?" Sarah asked, curious about the opportunities that might be available to her. "There are several possibilities," Colonel Hayes replied, "but I want to discuss one option that might be particularly suitable for someone with your background and abilities. We've been asked to recommend candidates for a new joint task force that will be working on strategic planning for emerging global challenges. The position would involve rapid promotion to lieutenant and assignment to a high-visibility project with significant responsibilities." The opportunity sounded both exciting and intimidating to Sarah. She had hoped for challenging assignments that would allow her to prove her capabilities, but she hadn't expected to be considered for such high-level responsibilities so early in her career. "What would be expected of someone in that position?" she asked. "The task force is developing strategic responses to complex international situations that require innovative thinking and the ability to coordinate with multiple agencies and allied nations," Colonel Hayes explained. "It's exactly the kind of work that your academic performance and leadership evaluations suggest you're capable of handling." Sarah considered the offer carefully, weighing the opportunities for rapid advancement against the pressure and expectations that would come with such a visible assignment. She realized that this was exactly the kind of challenge she had been hoping for when she made the decision to pursue military service, and she felt ready to prove that her confidence in her own abilities was justified. "I'm very interested in the assignment," Sarah told Colonel Hayes. "When would it begin?" "Immediately after you complete this program," the colonel replied with a smile. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Martinez. I think you're about to begin a very interesting career." Lieutenant Sarah Martinez arrived at the Pentagon for her first day with the Joint Task Force feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The assignment represented everything she had hoped to achieve when she first decided to pursue military service, but the reality of working in such a high-profile environment was more intimidating than she had expected. She wore her dress uniform with pride, knowing that every detail of her appearance and performance would be scrutinized by senior officers who had decades more experience than her 20 years. The Joint Task Force was housed in a secure section of the Pentagon, with access restricted to personnel with the highest security clearances. Sarah's new supervisor, Colonel Jennifer Washington, had an impressive background in strategic planning and had specifically requested Sarah for the team based on her exceptional performance evaluations from the Leadership Development Program. The team's mission involved developing response strategies for emerging global threats that required coordination between multiple branches of the military and various intelligence agencies. Sarah's first few weeks on the assignment involved intensive briefings on current international situations and classified intelligence assessments. She quickly discovered that the strategic challenges facing the modern military were even more complex and nuanced than what she had studied during her academic coursework. The scenarios required balancing military considerations with diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian factors in ways that demanded both analytical precision and creative problem-solving. The other members of the task force were seasoned officers with extensive experience in their respective specialties, and Sarah initially felt overwhelmed by the depth of their knowledge and expertise. Major Kevin O'Brien had spent 15 years in military intelligence, Captain Lisa Chen specialized in cyber warfare, and Major David Rodriguez was an expert in international logistics and supply chain management. Sarah was by far the youngest member of the team and the only one who had received such a rapid promotion to her current rank. Despite her initial intimidation, Sarah quickly proved that her selection for the task force had been well-founded. Her ability to synthesize complex information and identify patterns that others missed became apparent during her first major briefing, when she presented an analysis of potential responses to a simulated crisis in Eastern Europe. Her presentation combined traditional military strategic thinking with innovative approaches that impressed both her teammates and the senior officers who reviewed the team's work. Colonel Washington recognized Sarah's contributions immediately and began assigning her increasingly challenging and visible responsibilities. Martinez has a unique ability to see connections between different aspects of a strategic situation that escape more experienced officers, she wrote in Sarah's first quarterly evaluation. Her recommendations consistently demonstrate both tactical soundness and creative thinking that brings new perspectives to complex problems. The task force's work was demanding and often involved long hours under tight deadlines, but Sarah thrived in the high-pressure environment. She found herself working closely with officers from other branches of the military, civilian intelligence analysts, and occasionally with representatives from allied nations. These interactions helped her develop a broader understanding of how military strategy intersected with international diplomacy and domestic policy considerations. One particularly challenging assignment involved developing contingency plans for a potential humanitarian crisis in a region where traditional military intervention would be politically complicated. Sarah's analysis focused on how military assets could be positioned to provide rapid humanitarian assistance while minimizing political complications for both the United States and allied nations. Her recommendations incorporated lessons learned from previous international interventions and proposed innovative approaches to coordination between military and civilian relief organizations. The presentation of Sarah's humanitarian crisis analysis to senior Pentagon officials marked a turning point in her young career. The briefing was attended by several generals and admirals, along with representatives from the State Department and various intelligence agencies. Sarah had prepared extensively for the presentation, knowing that it would be her most visible opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities to the military's senior leadership. General Patricia Harrison, who served as the Pentagon's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, was particularly impressed by Sarah's presentation. General Harrison had risen through the ranks over a 30-year career and had developed a reputation for identifying and mentoring exceptional younger officers. She recognized in Sarah's analysis the kind of strategic thinking that would be essential for future military leadership. Lieutenant Martinez, General Harrison said after Sarah's presentation, "I'd like to speak with you privately about your analysis and some potential opportunities for your continued development." The private meeting with General Harrison lasted over an hour and covered not only Sarah's specific recommendations but also her background, career goals, and potential for future advancement. The general was particularly interested in Sarah's perspective on how military strategy should evolve to address emerging global challenges and the role that younger officers should play in developing new approaches to traditional problems. "You have an exceptional combination of analytical ability and practical strategic thinking," General Harrison told Sarah. "I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion to captain and assignment to a new strategic planning initiative that will report directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The promotion and new assignment represented advancement that would typically require several additional years of experience, but General Harrison convinced the review board that Sarah's exceptional performance and unique perspectives justified the accelerated timeline. The new position would involve working on the military's most sensitive strategic planning projects and would provide Sarah with exposure to the highest levels of military leadership. Sarah's new role required her to work closely with a team of senior officers who were developing long-term strategic plans for potential future conflicts and international challenges. The work was highly classified and involved scenarios that the military hoped would never become reality, but for which comprehensive planning was essential. Sarah's contributions focused on analyzing how emerging technologies and changing international relationships might affect traditional strategic approaches. The demands of her new position required Sarah to travel frequently to military installations around the world, where she observed training exercises and consulted with field commanders about practical implementation of strategic plans. These experiences provided her with a deeper understanding of how strategic decisions affected actual military operations and helped her develop more realistic and practical approaches to strategic planning. During a visit to a training facility in Europe, Sarah had an unexpected encounter that brought her full circle from the humiliation she had experienced in her high school library. She was observing a complex multi-unit training exercise when she noticed a familiar face among the civilian observers. Jessica Crawford, her former high school tormentor, was visiting the facility as part of a congressional delegation focused on military readiness and defense spending. Jessica had followed a more traditional path after high school, attending college and eventually working for a congressman who served on the House Armed Services Committee. Her role involved analyzing military programs and spending proposals, work that was important but hardly as visible or impactful as Sarah's strategic planning responsibilities. When Jessica recognized Sarah during a break in the training exercise, she approached with obvious surprise and curiosity. "Sarah Martinez?" Jessica said uncertainly. "I can't believe it's really you. I heard you had joined the military, but I had no idea you had advanced so quickly." Sarah turned to face her former classmate, noting the contrast between Jessica's nervous demeanor and her own confident, professional bearing. Sarah was now a captain with significant responsibilities and recognition from the military's senior leadership, while Jessica remained in a junior staff position despite having followed what everyone in Millbrook had considered the more promising path. "Hello, Jessica," Sarah replied politely but coolly. "I see you're working on Capitol Hill now. How do you find the work?" "It's interesting," Jessica replied, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "But I have to say, I never expected to see you briefing generals and leading strategic planning sessions. I mean, who would have thought that someone from Millbrook could achieve something like this?" Sarah studied Jessica's face, seeing in her former tormentor's expression a mixture of surprise, envy, and perhaps even a belated recognition of the mistake she had made in underestimating Sarah's potential. "I think you'd be surprised by what people can achieve when they're given the opportunity to prove themselves," Sarah replied calmly. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Harrison, who had flown in to observe the training exercise and to meet with Sarah about her analysis of the strategic implications of the scenarios being tested. When the general approached, Sarah stood at attention and prepared to introduce Jessica, but General Harrison's focus was entirely on Sarah and the important work they needed to discuss. "Captain Martinez," General Harrison said, "I've reviewed your preliminary analysis of the exercise scenarios, and I'm impressed by your insights into how these tactical approaches might be applied in actual strategic situations. I'd like to discuss your recommendations with the Joint Chiefs next week." Jessica watched this interaction with obvious amazement, finally understanding the extent to which Sarah had not only recovered from the humiliation of high school but had transformed herself into someone commanding respect from the most senior levels of military leadership. The contrast between Sarah's current position and Jessica's own career trajectory was stark and impossible to ignore. After General Harrison and Sarah departed for their private briefing, Jessica found herself reflecting on the incident that had seemed so insignificant to her at the time. She had convinced herself that forcing Sarah to cut her hair was nothing more than a harmless prank that would help Sarah fit in better with their classmates. Now, seeing Sarah's confidence and accomplishments, Jessica began to understand that her actions had been motivated by jealousy and insecurity rather than any genuine desire to help. Later that evening, Jessica approached Sarah again, finding her in the facility's officers' club where Sarah was reviewing notes from the day's observations. This time, Jessica's demeanor was completely different, humble, apologetic, and clearly struggling with feelings of regret and guilt that had apparently been building for years. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about what happened in high school," Jessica began hesitantly. "I've been thinking about it a lot since I saw you today, and I realize that I owe you a sincere apology for what I did to you in the library that day." Sarah looked up from her notes, surprised by Jessica's change in tone and approach. She had long since moved beyond the anger and humiliation she had felt after the incident, but she was curious to hear what Jessica had to say after all these years. "I was jealous of you," Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were so smart and confident about what you wanted to do with your life, and I felt threatened by that. I thought if I could humiliate you, it would somehow make me feel better about my own insecurities and uncertainties." "And did it?" Sarah asked quietly. "No," Jessica replied immediately. "It made me feel worse, both then and now. Watching you today, seeing what you've accomplished and how respected you are, I realized that what I did was not just cruel but also incredibly stupid. I tried to tear down someone who was exceptional, and all I accomplished was revealing my own weakness and insecurity." Sarah considered Jessica's apology carefully before responding. She had learned during her military service that leadership sometimes required showing grace and understanding even toward people who had caused harm, particularly when they demonstrated genuine remorse and growth. "I appreciate your apology," Sarah said finally. "What happened that day was painful, but it also became a turning point for me. It helped me realize that I was stronger than I thought, and it motivated me to pursue opportunities that I might not have attempted otherwise." "Do you think you would have ended up in the military anyway?" Jessica asked. "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "I might have followed a more traditional path through college and graduate school. But the incident showed me that I didn't want my life to be defined by other people's limitations or expectations. It pushed me to prove myself in an environment where performance and capability mattered more than social dynamics." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Harrison, who had returned to the officers' club to continue her discussions with Sarah about upcoming strategic planning initiatives. When the general approached their table, Sarah stood to introduce Jessica, but General Harrison's attention was focused entirely on more pressing military matters. "Captain Martinez," the general said, "I just received word from Washington that your analysis of the training scenarios has been reviewed by the Joint Chiefs, and they're requesting an immediate briefing on your recommendations for implementation. Can you be ready to present to the full Joint Chiefs tomorrow morning?" The request represented the kind of opportunity that most officers would spend decades hoping to receive, a chance to present directly to the military's highest leadership on matters of critical strategic importance. Sarah felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation as she realized the significance of what was being asked of her. "Yes, General," Sarah replied confidently. "I'll be ready." As General Harrison departed to make arrangements for the briefing, Jessica sat in stunned silence, finally comprehending the full extent of Sarah's transformation and achievement. The girl she had tried to humiliate in a small-town library was now preparing to advise the nation's highest military leadership on matters of strategic importance. "Sarah," Jessica said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm sorry that I ever tried to stand in your way." Sarah looked at her former tormentor with a mixture of forgiveness and determination. "Thank you for saying that, Jessica. But you should know that you never really stood in my way. You just helped me realize that my path would be different from what other people expected, and ultimately, that turned out to be exactly what I needed." The next morning, Captain Sarah Martinez stood before the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, presenting strategic recommendations that would influence military planning for years to come. As she spoke with confidence and authority about complex international challenges and innovative strategic responses, she reflected briefly on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a small-town library where her head was shaved in humiliation to the highest levels of military leadership where her mind was valued and respected. The girl who had once been seen as strange for her interest in military strategy was now helping to shape the future of American military strategy. The incident that had seemed like the worst thing that could happen to her had become the catalyst for achievements that exceeded even her own ambitious dreams. Standing before the nation's top generals and admirals, Captain Martinez knew that sometimes the most painful experiences could become the foundation for the most extraordinary accomplishments.